A lot of rappers still, it seems like, want to be Tupac. They want to have his popularity. They want people to love them like everyone loves him. But why do you think no one's succeeding?
Well, because this is what they fail to realize about Tupac. In order for them to be Tupac, they would have to die before they peaked. Right before they peaked, they would have to die. So if you don't die, you can't do it. Bottom line, if you don't go die, you're not gonna be the next Tupac, because it ain't gonna be the next Tupac. Straight up.
Hello, my name is Cathy Scott. I am an author and news reporter, and the author of The Killing of Tupac Shakur and The Murder of Biggie Smalls, both bestsellers. And I am here today rocking it with Gab at MAKAVELI Media.
Yo, YouTube, what up? It's your homie Gab. I'm in the building, and this is MAKAVELI Media. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, award-winning author of the best-selling book, The Killing of Tupac Shakur, and the first person to break Tupac's murder out in Las Vegas. Head journalist and reporter, Miss Cathy Scott. Miss Cathy, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Man, it's been a long time coming, right?
It has been, yes. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So I got a question for you. Let's jump straight into it. So how in the world, Miss Scott, did you wind up being the lead reporter? I mean, the first person to actually break the story that Tupac Shakur was murdered after the Mike Tyson fight out in Las Vegas. Take us through the whole encounter. I want to know what you had for breakfast. I want to know everything that happened that day. And, take us through exactly what happened.
Well, I was a reporter at the Las Vegas Sun, and my beat was the police beat, so I covered crime. And I got a call late at night. I mean, it was middle of the night. It was like 2 a.m. or something. And it was a homicide cop telling me to go to the Las Vegas Strip, that a big rapper, and he pronounced his name as Tupac Shakur. He couldn't even pronounce his name. They didn't know who he was. And he said he was shot, and you should go down there. So I did, and he was on his way back from, it could have been 3 a.m, but he was on his way back from the crime scene, and so I just, hauled out of bed and headed down to the Strip. I lived probably about 7 miles from the Strip at the time, and the Las Vegas Strip, and went down there, and there were CSI guys, forensics, still working the scene, some lingering people hanging around, bicycle cops, stuff like that. And that's the day I started reporting on the case, and I've never stopped.
Did you have any idea at the time who Tupac Shakur was? The guy didn't even give you his name right. Did you have any idea who Tupac was?
Oh, I was a huge MTV watcher. So I was the only song I was familiar with who Tupac was, but the only song I really knew was Dear Mama, and it still, gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. It's just a beautiful song. So I knew who he was, and I knew he was, he was on MTV a lot, so he was a big deal. And but the world of hip hop, of course, I didn't, I was unfamiliar with. But I always kept up on current affairs and stuff like that. So I'm like, people in the newsroom, nobody knew who he was, so and then they had a news conference that was Saturday night, early Sunday morning. So they had a news conference in Vegas. There's no paparazzi hanging around at the airports. They're not allowed. And when they have a news conference, you're lucky if 4 reporters show up, and that includes TV, print, and, but all the sports people, were in town to cover the Tyson fight, on Friday night, and Bruce Seldon and Mike Tyson, which was partly why Tupac was in town, and so everybody was in town. So all the news outlets sent their sports writers and crews, and so there were about 50 people at the, with cameras and every satellite trucks and everything else, and for a news conference down at Homicide, and the sergeant looked like he was a deer caught in headlights. Because you don't have paparazzi hanging around. You don't. It's it was still small town back then.
Okay, right. So, take me through the crime scene. When you first get there, like you said, you see the reporters. Was the yellow tape and stuff like that, was that still present?
Yeah, the crime scene tape, keeping everybody away from the scene, was there, and a couple of bike cops were still hanging around there and kind of watching the scene, and because they have jurisdiction over the strip, and I'm trying to think who else, and it, pedestrians. I mean, it was a crime scene, so it was all cordoned off and nobody could go to it. So, but traffic wasn't busy at that time, but it still, people were having to drive out of the way, and CSI people were doing their thing, putting their little markers down on the ground and whatever they see to preserve the scene. And so basically it was just being worked as forensically at that point. Most of the people were gone.
Right.
The car was still there.
The car was still there.
Yeah, but I couldn't get to it, but the car was still there.
Oh, okay.
And then it went to an impound yard, and a photographer and I, not Sunday, so we went on Monday. On Monday, he and I went to the impound yard where the car was, and he took photos of it from, outside the fence.
Wow. I'm trying to ask you, so who was the very first person that you think you talked to obtain the information of exactly what happened? Who was the first person you interviewed?
Well, it was homicide cops, and then the sergeant there's always a team of one sergeant and two detectives. That's what they do in Vegas. And it's Clark County, it's the county sheriff's, Metropolitan Police Department. And so I called Death Row Records. I went the rounds, and in the meantime, a lot of reporters from New York magazine reporters, hip hop and all the music magazines, they were trying to get information and couldn't reach Homicide, so they were calling me because they saw our stories, and so they were feeding me information too, and so they were kind of tipping me off on who to call and whatnot. And I went down there and went to the hospital. We had another gal they assigned to it. They sent her to the hospital as well. And at the hospital, I met, there are lots of people from the west side of Las Vegas, which is, which is the black section. And there were lots of people playing music, standing on the roofs and around. It's a small, it was a hospital with kind of a traffic circle and a parking lot, and so cars were just kind of circulating. Some had parked, and so one guy, and I interviewed him for a story, but one guy came up to me and, he was standing, and I approached him as well, and just asked them what they thought was going on. Why was he shot? I was trying to get to who would have done it and why, I mean, in a drive-by-drive, a car-to-car shooting, which isn't that usual. And cops from the beginning said it was gang-related, almost from the start.
So the very first night that you was out there to cover the Tupac shooting at this time?
That would have been a bike cop. Yeah, well, the bike cop told me that, and yeah, but you know, part of that is the stigma. So I'd always take things with a grain of salt, especially in the beginning of an investigation. But you know, you've got a bunch of, you know, black guys following in a car behind Tupac, and you know, and so they, you know, they were starting to interview him, but not the bike cop. You know, that wasn't his job, and said it was probably gang related, you know, and that kind of threw that out from the very beginning, you know. But it you know, I think that you scratch the surface and you always get a little bit more. So it just, from that point to then the Monday to the news conference, and I had already spoken to the police at that point too, and then at headquarters where I went to homicide with a bunch of other reporters, they just weren't giving us very much information.
So initially, how bad were they saying Tupac wounds were? Did they say that it was life-threatening? Because you know, homicide was investigating from the beginning. So I'm just trying to figure out, did they consider Tupac's wounds to be life-threatening? What was the status? You know, I don't get information on medical from cops. You know, so I just go straight to the source. So I called the hospital that Sunday to get an update on him. And you call and you say you're a reporter and you're calling for an update on a patient. And he was in the trauma unit in critical condition. And then I think the next day, then I went to the hospital. Another reporter went there too, and she was from my paper, and she was reporting on it too. And my thing was, I was assigned mostly to cover the investigation, and she was following up at the hospital, but I did too. And you know, just for my own edification, and I would talk to the trauma unit, and I typically call twice a day, and that's what I was doing morning and afternoon to check on his status. And I was told he was in surgery and, you know, that sort of thing, and he was still, there was no change. He was in critical condition, no change, day after day, until that final day.